The trouble started when the HOA put up that new sign at the entrance of Oak Summit Ranches. It read, "Private Community, Rules Enforced," freshly bolted into a stone pillar as if they were claiming this land like a colony. I knew then that the Homeowners Association wasn't just about lawn length or mailbox colors anymore. It had turned into something else, something worse. Something that didn't respect boundaries. Something that didn't respect me. I own Lot 17. Not just a house. A full 25-acre spread, pastureland, forest grove, a stream, and my pride and joy, the red barn. This barn had been in my family for generations. My grandfather built it in the 50s with timber he milled himself. My dad retrofitted it with steel reinforcements in the 80s after a tornado barely scratched it. And me? I added the bulls. 5 of them. Each over 3,000 pounds, each bred for strength, size, and control. They weren't just animals to me. They were security, legacy, and protection rolled into living tanks of muscle and horn. Trained, not tamed. And absolutely not HOA business. But it turns out the HOA had been watching. Not officially. Not openly. Not the way decent folks do it. They had their Community Code Enforcement Unit, which sounded like a joke, until I met them. It was a Saturday morning when I first noticed the drone. Black. Silent. Hovering above the pasture like a vulture that didn't need to flap its wings. My bulls didn't like it. Neither did I. I fetched my scope, got a good look at the markings, and saw the HOA logo printed small near the tail. Oak Summit HOA Security Division. I reported it to the sheriff. He laughed. Said unless they entered my property there wasn't much he could do. They enter that barn, I warned, it's gonna be a different story. And I meant every word. The barn sat on the west slope of my property, surrounded by double-fence security, 1 electric, 1 reinforced wood, and cameras at every corner. Not because I was paranoid but because I'd had problems before. Oak Summit wasn't always HOA run. When I first moved in we had simple neighborly agreements, not rulebooks thicker than law books. But ever since Priscilla Harmon got elected HOA president, things had shifted. She was the kind of woman who believed in order, like it was a religion, and she appointed herself the high priestess. Her goons, the so-called code officers, wore navy polo shirts with bad-shaped patches and carried radios like they were state troopers. They weren't. They were ex-mall security guards and one former parking enforcement guy named Len who took himself way too seriously. It wasn't long before the letters started showing up. Unregistered livestock on Lot 17. Unauthorized agricultural structure. Excessive fencing. Surveillance systems not approved by architectural review. I ignored them. All of them. Because under county law, my land was zoned agricultural, and I had every legal right to raise bulls, maintain security, and keep my barn however I saw fit. The HOA had no jurisdiction over me. But the thing about power? People don't like it when they can't control it. Especially Priscilla. That's when they escalated. They started citing me for made-up violations. Noise complaints from empty lots. Smells that didn't exist. One neighbor said they saw suspicious activity at my barn at night. I'd laugh if it weren't so transparent. I'd sometimes walk into town and feel eyes following me. One time I saw a code officer parked across from my ranch gate just watching. I approached, he drove off. It all came to a head one Sunday morning just after dawn. I was sipping black coffee on the porch, watching the mist lift from the grass when I heard the crunch of tires. Not the slow roll of a visitor. This was urgent. Fast. 2 white SUVs with HOA enforcement, painted across the sides, pulled up right to my gate. 3 men stepped out, 2 in those HOA polos, 1 in tactical gear. Real gear, like something you'd see in a SWAT raid. Ballistic vest, holstered sidearm, boots laced high. He had a clipboard. I opened the gate and approached. "You got no jurisdiction here," I said before they could open their mouths. The tactical guy stepped forward. "We received multiple reports of animal cruelty, sir," he said. "We're here to inspect the barn. Not without a warrant. It's a community safety issue. Doesn't change the Constitution." He looked annoyed. He thought the uniform would scare me. But I wasn't the type to blink. Behind me the bulls stirred in the field, already sensing something off. I could see their ears twitching. Bulls are like dogs, they know. "If you step foot beyond that gate," I said, "you'll regret it." They left. For now. That night I didn't sleep much. I'd bolted the barn myself. Heavy-duty locking system, motion detectors, and internal security cameras linked directly to my phone. I checked every hour. Midnight. 2. 4. At 4:47 a.m. the system triggered. Motion at the barn. I sat up, heart thumping, and looked at the feed. 4 figures moving fast, 2 already at the side entrance. They wore black. One had bolt cutters. Another had what looked like a crowbar. They weren't just snooping, they were breaking in. I grabbed my rifle, threw on boots, and bolted down the hill in the dark. By the time I reached the fence, the lock was already breached. The barn door was wide open, lights flicked on, and I heard the unmistakable guttural snorts of disturbed bulls. Then the screaming started. Not mine. A man howled, a deep, guttural scream of panic. Then another voice yelling, "Get out! Get out!" I pushed through the fence, weapon ready, but I didn't need to fire. The scene inside spoke for itself. 2 of the HOA cops were backed into a corner, frozen in fear as Brutus, the lead bull, snorted and pawed the ground. His horns were lowered, ready to charge, eyes locked onto the man holding the crowbar. Behind him, the other 4 bulls stood like a wall, breathing steam, muscles twitching under the barn lights. The intruders weren't just trespassers now. They were prey. I didn't need to say anything. Brutus took a single step forward and the man dropped the crowbar. Another step and the second man dropped to his knees, hands raised. "Call them OFF," he screamed. I whistled once. Short and sharp. Brutus paused, then stepped back. "Barely. You broke into my barn," I said calmly. "You entered private agricultural land without a warrant. That's not a code violation. That's a felony. We were told this was a health emergency." "By who? Priscilla?" They didn't answer. One of them looked like he might cry. I took out my phone, showed them the timestamp security footage. "You're on camera, all of you. Forced entry. No warrant. No sheriff present. I'm sending this to my attorney and to the local news." "You can't do that," the man said. "Watch me." I called the sheriff anyway, because unlike these HOA clowns, he was real law enforcement. When he arrived and saw the footage, he didn't even try to hide his smirk. "Looks like your bulls did all the work," he said. "I told you," I replied. "I warned everyone." The HOA tried to spin the incident. Claimed I had dangerous animals. That I was running an unregistered livestock operation. That my bulls posed a threat to community safety. Didn't matter. The footage went viral. The sheriff confirmed I was fully within my rights. Even the local DA had to admit it. The HOA had overstepped in a big way. But this wasn't over. Because when people like Priscilla lose control, they don't stop. They double down. And I had a feeling the next move wouldn't just be about bulls or barns. It would be war. The morning after the break-in was quiet, too quiet, like the silence you feel before a thunderstorm when the wind disappears and the air turns heavy. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. First it was local news wanting statements, then it was neighbors calling, some to congratulate me, others to nervously ask if I was planning to sue the HOA. And then the email came. From the HOA board itself. Subject line: Notice of Emergency Special Hearing regarding Lot 17. No explanation, no apology, just a demand for my presence at a hastily scheduled meeting in the community hall Tuesday night sharp. I knew what this was. Damage control. They weren't just licking their wounds, they were regrouping, preparing to shift blame, to twist the narrative, and if I wasn't ready they'd do it in a way that made me look like the villain. So I got ready. I printed copies of the security footage frame by frame with timestamps showing the moment the bolt cutters were used and the moment Brutus stepped forward in defense. I pulled my zoning records, including the documentation from the county that confirmed my right to own livestock on agricultural land regardless of HOA policy. And I found something else too. A document from 3 years ago signed by the HOA itself that explicitly acknowledged Lot 17 was grandfathered in under pre-existing agricultural rules and not subject to new residential restrictions. It was signed by Priscilla Harmon herself. I slid that into a red folder and made 3 copies. Tuesday came fast. The community hall looked different than it had before. The usual coffee table had been pushed aside, replaced with a long plastic table where the entire HOA board sat like some tribunal from a bad courtroom show. Priscilla was seated in the middle, spine straight, hair pulled into a severe bun, wearing a dark gray suit like she was presiding over a funeral. To her left sat her deputy, a man named Gordon Kell, who used to run a hardware store before deciding his real passion was enforcing bylaws about garden gnomes. To her right was Len, the same overzealous code officer who once cited a neighbor for painting their fence the wrong shade of beige. The hall was packed. Residents filled the chairs, some standing in the back whispering as I entered. A few gave me nods, others avoided eye contact. The air was heavy with anticipation, like everyone knew something big was about to happen. Priscilla didn't even say hello. She banged her gavel onto the table and began. This emergency session has been called to address the ongoing violations and safety concerns regarding Lot 17 owned by Mr. Graham Wolf. That was my cue. I stood and faced them holding my folder in one hand, keeping my voice even. Before we go any further, let's be clear. I own agricultural land as designated by the county. This board has no authority to override that zoning, and the intrusion into my barn by your so-called enforcement team was illegal trespass. Priscilla didn't flinch. We received credible reports of animal abuse, she said calmly, and our security team acted under the direction of the Community Safety Charter. You mean they broke into my barn in the middle of the night without a warrant or cause or presence of a peace officer and nearly got themselves gored by a 3,000-pound bull? You endangered your own men, not me. Gordon chimed in. We have documentation that your bulls are not licensed. Licensed by who? I shot back. The county has no such requirement for livestock on AG land, and you know it. Priscilla leaned forward, folding her hands. Mr. Wolf, you are not above the rules. You mean the ones you invent as you go along? I dropped the red folder onto the table. Inside is a copy of the signed 2022 agreement in which this very board acknowledged my exemption status, along with timestamped video of your team breaking into my barn, along with a notarized letter from the county zoning office confirming my rights. I suggest the board stop this circus now before you make things worse. The silence that followed was deep and uncomfortable. Priscilla didn't touch the folder. Instead, she looked around the room. We are concerned about the safety of our residents, she said carefully, and we believe Mr. Wolf's aggressive animals present a threat. Then maybe your people shouldn't trespass into a locked structure in the middle of the night, I said. Someone in the back chuckled. She turned to the audience, eyes narrowing. This is not a joke. No, but it's about to be a lawsuit, I said. The board recessed without resolution. They said they'd discuss it privately and issue a formal decision in 72 hours. But by the next morning the retaliation had already begun. I woke to find my mailbox torn off its post. 3 of my security cameras were smashed. The electric fence had been tampered with, one of the battery packs removed and left fried in the grass. Coincidence maybe, but unlikely. The bulls were restless, pacing more than usual, twitching at sounds that weren't there. They knew something was coming. So did I. Later that afternoon a letter was taped to my front door. Another citation. This one claiming I had violated a new ordinance against livestock structures within 50 feet of a property line, which was rich because the barn had been there for 70 years, long before any of these houses were built. I knew what this was. They were trying to build a case, a paper trail to justify something bigger. I drove to town, met with my attorney, a woman named Darcy Cook who had the attitude of a coiled rattlesnake and the memory of a computer. She looked over everything and nodded once. They're building toward a lien, she said. They want to declare your barn a nuisance, then fine you when you don't remove it, then file a lien when you refuse to pay. How long would that take, I asked. Couple weeks tops if the board's unified. I leaned back in my chair thinking. Then we're not going to let them unify. I started visiting my neighbors. Not all of them, but the ones I knew hadn't fallen under Priscilla's spell. The Andersons, who ran a dog rescue on their half-acre lot. The Morales family, who were still mad the HOA made them repaint their shed twice. Old man Harner, who had lived here since the 60s and said the only rules he followed were gravity and common sense. I showed them the footage, told them the full story. And one by one they agreed to help. We drafted a petition to hold a recall vote for the HOA board under Section 8 of the Community Charter. It needed 25% of homeowners to trigger. We got 32% in 48 hours. Priscilla tried to declare it invalid, claimed we hadn't filed it correctly. But we had legal oversight every step of the way. She looked rattled for the first time when she realized she couldn't stop it. The recall vote was scheduled for the following Saturday in the same community hall where they tried to humiliate me. I prepared my speech carefully. Not angry, not bitter, just facts. I laid out the costs of their enforcement campaigns. The drone surveillance. The security team's salaries. The legal fees. I showed how dues had gone up 20% since Priscilla took over. And then I told the truth. The HOA didn't care about safety. They cared about control. And the barn, the bulls, my independence, it all threatened the illusion of order they'd built. I finished with this. You don't have to like my bulls. You don't have to like me. But if this board can break into my barn today, they can break into your shed tomorrow. This isn't about animals. It's about who owns your land. You or them. The vote wasn't close. Priscilla was removed by a margin of almost 60 to 40. Gordon and Len stepped down before the results were even certified. It felt like victory. For a moment. But then a black SUV pulled up to my gate. New stickers, new name. Regional Property Management Services. Not the HOA. A private company. Turns out before the vote even happened, Priscilla had outsourced enforcement to a third party under an emergency contract. Which meant they still had access. Still had power. And their boss wasn't a neighbor. He was a man named Roland Tate. And he didn't care about community. He cared about control. And he had already set his sights on my barn. Roland Tate arrived in Oak Summit like a man on a mission, even though nobody had asked for one. He wasn't from here, that much was clear the moment he stepped out of his black SUV wearing a tailored jacket, boots too clean for real dirt, and sunglasses that never came off even indoors. He walked with the confidence of someone who didn't need permission. Because technically he didn't. Priscilla Harmon had signed the emergency enforcement contract with Regional Property Management Services just days before her recall vote, which meant even though she had lost the community, the contract remained active. It gave Tate and his team limited authority to enforce the HOA code and access to all public and shared areas of the neighborhood. But Tate didn't believe in limits. Within the first week of his arrival, he had already issued more citations than the entire HOA board had in a month. Grass too tall. Trash bins left out too long. One neighbor got fined for having a wind chime too loud. Another for a crack in their walkway. And every single notice came with a logo not of the HOA but of his company. There was no appeal. No discussion. Just fines and threats. When I first saw him at the market, he looked me straight in the eye as if he had been briefed on me before arriving. "You must be the bull guy," he said like it was an insult. I didn't smile. "And you must be the outsider," I replied. He smirked. "I like to think of myself as the solution." "I think you're the next problem," I said. We stood there like that for a few seconds, two wolves pretending to be civil. He turned and left without another word. 2 days later, my water meter was damaged. Then the internet line to my cameras was cut. No storm, no work orders, just silent sabotage. But the worst came that Friday night. I was up late checking the new trail cams I had placed in the tree lines surrounding the barn ever since the HOA break-in. I had taken extra precautions. The feed from the east camera went dark at 1:15 a.m. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle and made my way across the field, fast but quiet. I reached the barn to find the side door had been pried open again. Inside, the lights were off, but I could hear movement. Low voices, muffled curses. I stayed hidden by the feed bins and peered around the corner. 3 men wearing dark gear, headlamps off, tools in hand. They weren't stealing. They were measuring. Taking photos. Pointing to structural beams and scribbling on clipboards. One of them opened a vial and took a soil sample by the trough. "What the hell are they doing?" I whispered to myself. Brutus was watching them from the stall, his breath heavy but calm. He didn't move, not yet. I stepped out slowly and chambered around. "You've got 10 seconds to explain yourselves," I said, "or my bulls aren't the only ones you need to worry about." They froze. Then one of them said calmly, "We're here on behalf of Regional Property Management conducting an inspection. At 1 in the morning. We work on our own schedule. Not on my land, you don't. This barn is under review," the man said. "We have reason to believe it violates structural code and poses a risk to nearby homes." "There are no nearby homes for 400 feet, I said. The man pulled out a folder and showed me a document that looked official but wasn't signed by anyone local. A private engineering report commissioned by RPM. It claimed my barn lacked proper foundation support. That it could collapse in strong winds. That it was a danger to the community. It was a lie. Calculated one. I told them to leave and called the sheriff again, but this time he was less helpful. Told me it was a civil matter. Said unless they damaged something or hurt someone, his hands were tied. I saw it then. The new game. They weren't going to break in and trigger another public backlash. They were going to bury me in paperwork and lies. Build a record against me. Erode my defenses. And eventually force the county to step in. I knew I had to move first. I called Darcy Cook again, and this time I didn't ask for advice, I gave her a job. "I want to sue them." "For what?" she asked. "For trespassing again. For harassment. For defamation. For targeted enforcement. Pick your poison," I told her. "We'll need proof." "I'll get it." And I did. I started collecting. I installed hidden cameras in new places, not just on my property but near the HOA community lot where Tate had set up a mobile office trailer. I recorded every interaction. Every inspection. Every violation notice handed out in the dead of night. And I wasn't the only one. Turns out other neighbors had been feeling the heat too. The Andersons had a truck towed for being parked a foot over the line. The Morales kids were told their swing set violated noise regulations. Old Man Harner found his tool shed padlocked with a sticker saying condemned. All of it traced back to RPM and Roland Tate. We held a private meeting at my barn. 10 families huddled under string lights and hay bales sharing stories. By the end of the night we had a plan. The next morning I filed a cease and desist letter through Darcy's office demanding all RPM operations on my land stop immediately. Tate ignored it, so I called the local news. This time I didn't just give them footage. I gave them the paper trail. The fake inspection. The false code violations. The images of RPM agents entering private property at night. The story ran under the headline "Private Security Firm Accused of Terrorizing Local Homeowners." It exploded online. Within 24 hours, county officials were getting calls. The sheriff changed his tone real fast. Said he'd be launching an investigation. And that's when Tate made his next move. He came to my gate himself in broad daylight. No sunglasses this time, just a folder in one hand and a smirk on his face. "We need to talk," he said. "We're past that," I told him. He handed me the folder. Inside was a formal complaint filed with the county asking for emergency condemnation of my barn. Claimed it was unsound. That the bulls were aggressive and had already endangered lives. He attached statements from anonymous witnesses. Photos taken out of context. Clipped footage that made it look like Brutus had charged someone instead of defending his territory. "You can't win this," I told him. "You might be able to outspend me, but you can't outstubborn me." Tate leaned closer. "Then we'll see who lasts longer." The next day the county sent an inspector. But I was ready. Darcy was there. So was my structural engineer. So was the media. The inspection went fine. Better than fine. They said the barn was solid as a bunker. That the bulls were well kept. That everything was in order. But it wasn't enough. Tate wasn't playing fair. He didn't need to win outright. He just needed to keep the pressure up. To make me slip. To make me lash out. To give him something real to use. So I didn't. I played it cool. I reinforced the fences. Installed backup power. Trained the bulls with new commands just in case. And then something unexpected happened. A whistleblower came forward. One of Tate's own men. His name was Max, a former code enforcer who had been with the HOA before it contracted RPM. He reached out anonymously at first, then met me in person behind the old feed store. He handed me a thumb drive. Inside were recordings. Memos. Emails. Proving that Tate had been ordered to provoke me. That Priscilla had personally requested he push until I broke zoning compliance. That they had even considered staging an incident to force animal control involvement. Max said he couldn't stay silent anymore. I asked him why. He said because his dad used to run cattle too. And because this wasn't justice anymore, it was war. I gave the drive to Darcy. She gave it to the DA. And just like that, the whole game changed. A grand jury was assembled. Subpoenas were issued. And suddenly RPM wasn't so confident. Tate disappeared for a few days. No one saw him. His SUV gone. His trailer locked up. Then late one night a convoy of trucks rolled into the neighborhood. They belonged to a hauling company out of state. They went straight to the trailer, loaded it up, and drove out before sunrise. Tate was gone. Just like that. But the fight wasn't over. Because even without him the damage had been done. The HOA was in shambles. The neighborhood was divided. And I had a feeling the people behind this hadn't given up. Not yet. Because power doesn't die easily. It retreats. It regroups. It returns. And when it did, it would find the barn still standing. And the bulls still waiting. After Tate vanished, everything went quiet for 3 days. No letters, no code violations, no trucks lurking around the edges of my fence line. But quiet didn't mean peace, not in a place like Oak Summit. It meant planning. It meant someone was out there rebuilding everything they had just lost. And I wasn't wrong. It started on the 4th day when I got a visit from the county clerk's office. Not a letter, not a phone call, a personal visit. A young man in a blue windbreaker and a clipboard stepped out of a county vehicle and introduced himself as Aaron from Records. He said there had been an inquiry submitted about my land. Not by me, but by a private party asking about easements and potential land access routes. They had requested topography maps, soil surveys, and flood zone assessments. Who was the party, I asked. He looked uncomfortable. Said it had come through a law firm from the city that specialized in property development. That's when I understood. They weren't trying to shut me down anymore. They were trying to buy me out. That night I got a phone call from a blocked number. A man's voice introduced himself as Thomas Langley from a development firm called Apex Land Partners. He said he was calling to make an offer. Not to argue. Not to threaten. Just to offer a solution. You've been through a lot, he said. More than you should have. We'd like to relieve you of that burden. We'll buy the entire parcel fair price, maybe even above market value, and you can move on somewhere quieter. I asked him why they wanted my land. He said something vague about future planning, infrastructure possibilities, and green zone redesign. Then he got specific. You're in the way of progress, Mr. Wolf. We can do this easy or we can do this hard. I told him I wasn't interested. And he told me I'd change my mind when the pressure started again. He was right about the pressure. But he was wrong about me. The next week was one long coordinated push to break me down. First, the development firm filed a request for zoning reassessment claiming my agricultural designation was outdated and in need of review. Then a separate anonymous complaint was filed with animal control claiming my bulls had been heard bellowing aggressively at night and were causing emotional distress to neighboring homes. 2 of the complaints came from addresses where no one currently lived. Then came the surprise visit from a city engineer claiming he was inspecting all older structures near floodplains. I told him I wasn't in a floodplain. He said new maps were being drawn and I might be. He walked around my barn tapping at beams with a metal stick and making notes on a pad that I was never allowed to see. After he left, I checked the online parcel map myself. There were no changes, no new flood zones, no updated risk assessments. He had lied. Every time I took one step forward, they pushed me back too. But I didn't cave. I called Darcy again, gave her everything from the visit logs to the recorded phone call with Langley. We filed a protective order with the county to prevent any third-party redevelopment offers without direct communication. It wouldn't stop them legally, but it would slow them down. At the same time, I launched something else. A public education campaign. I made a website. Not just about me but about HOA overreach across the country. I told my story. Posted the footage of the barn break-in. The fake inspection. The secret development plans. I started getting emails from people in other towns who had gone through the same thing. One man in Arizona had lost his entire orchard to a zoning flip engineered by an HOA working with a developer. Another in Florida had been fined into foreclosure over his chicken coop. I put all their stories on the site. I called it Stand Your Ground Landowners Against HOA Abuse. Within a week it had 50,000 visitors. Local media picked it up again. This time I was no longer just a rancher with bulls. I was a symbol of pushback. That's when they tried to silence me. A lawsuit was filed against me for defamation. Filed by Apex Land Partners. Claiming I had damaged their reputation, interfered with business, and incited harassment against their employees. It was a slap-suit strategic lawsuit against public participation designed to drain my money and time. Darcy filed a counter motion immediately. We held a press conference on the courthouse steps. The story spread even faster. People were angry. They saw me not as a landowner in a private feud but as a target of corporate bullying. Support started pouring in. Donations to my legal fund. Offers of volunteer help. Even a local feed store started offering discounts to neighbors who had received unfair citations. The mood in Oak Summit shifted. People who had once ignored me now came by to shake my hand. But the board didn't stop. After Priscilla's removal, they had installed a temporary board led by a man named Alan Burke who was quieter than Priscilla but just as determined. He called a new emergency meeting. This time not about me directly, but about a vote to rezone the entire back section of the neighborhood for commercial partnership. That section included my land. Even though I was legally exempt, they were trying to create a bubble around me. Box me in with parking lots, buildings, noise, and traffic. If I wouldn't sell, they'd build around me. The vote was scheduled for Thursday night. They needed a simple majority of homeowners present to pass it. But this time I didn't show up alone. I brought half the town with me. Not just from Oak Summit but from neighboring communities that had heard my story. Farmers, ranchers, old-school homeowners who were tired of being told what they could and couldn't do on their own land. I stood up and spoke again. Not with anger. With purpose. You want to build over everything I said. You want to take what's wild and make it quiet. You want to erase people like me because we don't fit the brochure. But I was here before you. My barn was here before your bylaws. My bulls were here before your board. And I'm not going anywhere. The room erupted in applause. The vote failed. 43% in favor. 57 against. Alan Burke looked like he'd swallowed a bee. But the real blow came the next morning. The county planning office issued a public statement that due to the controversy and legal filings they were suspending all review and zoning requests in Oak Summit pending further investigation. It was a freeze. A full stop. And just like that the steamroller slowed. Langley called me again 2 days later. This time he sounded less smug, more tired. You've made your point, he said. But we'll wait. You can't stay in that barn forever. I told him I didn't need forever. Just long enough to outlast people like him. That Sunday I held a small gathering at the barn. Neighbors, friends, supporters from out of town. We grilled steaks, drank beer, and let the kids pet Brutus, who despite his size had become something of a legend. Someone brought a banner that said "Hold the line." We hung it over the barn doors. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. I knew there were other moves coming. Legal ones, political ones, maybe even personal. But I also knew one thing with absolute certainty. They had underestimated what a man will do when you come after his land. They thought I'd give in. They thought I'd get tired. They thought the bulls were the only force they had to worry about. They were wrong. Because the barn stood firm. And so did I. The wind changed the morning I got the letter from the federal office. Not the HOA. Not the county. Federal. It was from the USDA's regional division, a formal notice of inspection under agricultural compliance protocol. I had been through every layer of local abuse already, but this was something new, something deeper. The envelope was thick, printed on government-grade paper and delivered by a uniformed courier who didn't say a word. Inside were 5 pages of legal citations and a notice that my property was to be inspected within 7 days for compliance with animal health, environmental safety, and land usage. No one I knew had ever been inspected like this. Darcy came to the house within the hour. She read the letter twice, then again in silence, then finally spoke. This isn't normal. Someone pulled strings. Big ones. I asked her what they were trying to do now. She looked at me steady and said they're trying to make it a federal issue. Because if they can't buy you and they can't scare you and they can't zone you out, they'll try to bury you in something bigger than county law. The inspection team arrived the following Tuesday morning. 4 white trucks with government plates, 7 agents with clipboards, gloves, boots, and equipment. No smiles, no greetings, just business. They split into teams. 1 for soil. 1 for livestock. 1 for building integrity. And 1 for runoff and environmental impact. They were here to find something, anything to justify federal violation charges which could lead to fines, seizures, even condemnation. I followed them around quietly, answering only what I had to. Brutus watched the inspectors like a sentry, his shoulders rising and falling with calm power. The others stood in the back paddock, aware but unbothered. The team took notes, collected samples, took photos, even used a drone to map out the entire property from above. After 6 hours they left without a word of decision. They said I'd receive the results by certified mail in 7 to 10 business days. For a week I barely slept. I kept working, I kept filing, I kept reinforcing the fences, the barn, the electronics. But I knew this wasn't about evidence anymore. It was about pressure. About breaking me slowly. Every time they failed they just came back harder. Then on the 8th day the letter came. USDA compliance report. My hands shook as I opened it. Darcy stood next to me silent. And then I read the words. This property was found to be fully compliant with all relevant regulations, no violations observed, no corrective action required. We stood in silence for a long moment. Then I finally breathed again. They had failed again. But I knew they were not finished. Because they still had 1 card left. The legal one. Langley filed a motion in state court to declare my barn a threat to community well-being under a little-known nuisance statute buried in decades-old legislation. It had never been used on agricultural land. It was written for urban blight, abandoned buildings, or unsafe factories. But they were going to try to twist it to fit me. The court date was set for 3 weeks later. This was it. Their last shot. If they won they could force me to dismantle the barn and remove the bulls or face daily penalties and court-ordered seizure. If I won the statute would be discredited and they would lose all leverage. I spent those 3 weeks preparing like it was war. Darcy assembled expert witnesses including my vet who testified that my bulls were healthier than most domestic dogs. An architect who verified the barn was structurally sound beyond code. An environmental scientist who confirmed my runoff was cleaner than most city storm drains. Even neighbors who stood on the witness list to testify that they never felt threatened by me or my animals. Langley came with a full team of lawyers, 3 experts and a hired PR firm in suits who sat in the back row just to watch. The trial lasted 3 full days. Every day the courtroom was packed, standing room only, reporters, cameras, legal observers, even students from a local university who said they were following it as a real-world case study. I took the stand on the 2nd day and told the story from the beginning. The HOA break-in. The private inspections. The sabotage. The drones. The fake violations. The zoning attacks. The development offers. The smear campaigns. The slap suit. The federal inspection. All of it. Darcy finished by playing a clip from the barn security footage of Brutus stepping between the trespassers and the feed room, calm, controlled, defensive, not aggressive. And then she said this. This isn't about a barn. It isn't about bulls. It isn't even about zoning. It's about power. About whether a man can still own something fully in this country without compromise. It's about what happens when private ambition tries to dress itself in the language of law. The judge listened. He asked questions. He read every brief. And then he took 2 full days to deliberate. The morning of the decision the courtroom was silent as we waited. The judge entered, sat down, looked at both tables and began. After careful review of all evidence, arguments and applicable law, it is the opinion of this court that Lot 17 remains a legally compliant agricultural property under existing zoning and state statute. The nuisance statute does not apply in this context, and this court rejects the plaintiff's claim in full. 1. The room erupted, but I didn't smile, not yet. Because I knew the war had taken its toll. Darcy turned to me and said, "They're out of weapons now. But you're still standing." The next week Langley quietly pulled out of Oak Summit. Apex Land Partners sold their holding contracts to a small local firm that issued a statement saying they had no plans for development and respected the agricultural integrity of the community. The HOA board went silent. No more citations, no more flyers, no more meetings. Some people whispered they had been warned by county officials to tread carefully. Others said the lawsuits had drained their reserves. I didn't care. The bulls were safe. The barn was safe. The land was safe. One evening I stood at the edge of the field looking out over the pasture as the sun dropped low. Brutus wandered up beside me and stood quiet. His head was level with my shoulder, his breath steady. We didn't need to speak. Because we both knew something no law, no corporation, no board could ever understand. Some ground is earned, not bought. Some homes are built with more than walls. And some fights are worth it not because of the prize but because of the principle. I turned and walked back to the barn, lights glowing warm in the dusk. Behind me the bulls followed. 5 giants. Unmoved. Unshaken. Unbeaten. If you enjoyed watching me stand my ground and expose the truth they never wanted you to see, make sure to like this video. Subscribe to HOA Confidential. And hit the bell so you never miss what they try to hide next.